Here's a question for the people who've only seen the anime adaptation of My Hero Academia. What will happen when All Might retires? All Might has already demonstrated a great fatigue from using his powers, and it seems like he's getting weaker every day. Eventually, he'll reach the point of not being able to use his powers at all. So what if that happens before Deku graduates from UA? To answer this question, I think it serves to understand what All Might represents. All Might is a symbol of peace. As long as he's around, evil will never win. There will always be him as the final, impassable barrier for all injustice. He protects the peace and justice that the innocent civilians enjoy. He doesn't do it for fame, money, or status. He serves the community, and his powers are incredible. He's got super strength, he can leap tall buildings in a single bound, and he's faster than a speeding bullet. Sorry, I started talking about Superman in the middle of that paragraph. But hey, have any of you guys noticed that these two are actually pretty similar? I'm sure I'm the first to come to that conclusion. The point is, that's probably by design. I mean, they both even have a meek alter ego. All Might is a larger-than-life superhero, universally adored by everyone who isn't literally evil, and even some who are. The first hero to reach that level of acclaim is none other than the son of Krypton. Superman was one of the first superheroes in the DC universe, and the icon of what a hero should be. The fact that he's from DC matters as well. In Marvel Comics, heroes often face ungratefulness and persecution from the public despite their good deeds. Look no further than the Spider-Menace or the X-Men for an example of what I'm talking about. But in the DC universe, heroes are treated almost like celebrities. We see some of the same treatment in the very first episode of My Hero Academia. When heroes show up, so does the paparazzi. Like Superman, All Might is the biggest hero. They're both the icons that represent what a hero should look like, and everyone aspires to be more like them. We have seen a couple of times when Superman has had to retire. Since Superman and All Might are direct parallels in their respective worlds, this serves as a pretty good indication of what should happen when the world's greatest hero steps down. The first death of Superman was a particularly eventful moment in comic book history. It was so monumentous that it was even discussed on the national news networks in America. The comic featured a character known as Doomsday, who could match Superman's might. Doomsday was created by Charles Darwin's evil brother by releasing a child into the most lethal environment that he could, waiting for it to die, cloning the remains, and repeating the process until the child's clones had become so strong that they could not only survive the harsh environment, but automatically revive himself after death, becoming immune to what had previously killed him in the process. This process turns him into a harbinger of death who seeks the destruction of all life. He ends up on Earth, and after taking out half a dozen superheroes, it's clear that Superman's the only one who might be able to stop him. After an epic battle that shakes Metropolis, Superman and Doomsday exchange their final, mightiest blows, and in the end, they both lay dead. Superman saved the world from Doomsday's destruction, sacrificing himself in the process. Following the comic's release, the public was absolutely devastated at such an icon's passing. But now there was a power vacuum, and a new idol needed to fill that spot. There were 4 contenders to the throne in Superboy, Cyborg Superman, the last son of Krypton, and my personal favorite, Steel. Then it was revealed that Superman wasn't actually dead at all, but in a special Kryptonian healing coma, which he didn't even previously know was a thing. He comes back and everything goes back to normal. Really, none of them quite lived up to the glory of the original Big Blue Boy Scout, so not much time passed before DC sort of curved them all in favor of bringing back the original Superman we all know and love. And everyone hated it. A lot of people were actually very angry about the ass-pull nature of how they just came out of nowhere and said, oh no, he never actually died. But sure enough, he makes his comeback and continues existing as the face of superheroes forever. So if Superman and All Might are direct parallels, should we expect a similar response when All Might dies or just retires? Well, we're going to dive into spoiler territory for the manga here. For those of us caught up with the manga, we're familiar with the aftermath of All Might's retirement. It was very similar in a lot of ways, but also very different in others. All Might fought against a man known only by the title of his quirk, All for One, the antithesis of One for All. All for One is able to steal other people's quirks for his own usage, but he can also give other people quirks if he's so inclined, which was used to create the Nomu. He was also responsible for the creation of the League of Villains, the group that has been targeting All Might since before the start of the series. The two meet face to face once again, as it's revealed that All for One was the person responsible for All Might's disfigurement, and engage in an epic battle. Because All for One is a particularly powerful quirk, All Might has to sacrifice himself to finally defeat his major foe. He uses up all of the power of One for All left inside of him to defeat All for One with a spectacular blow. Despite the strength having left his body, he points to the cameras that have been following the fight and loudly declares, "You're next." Unbeknownst to the public, who view this declaration as a bold threat to the remainder of the League of Villains, this is where All Might dies as a superhero. Midoriya is the only one who gets the true meaning of All Might's message, that he will have to take the torch from this moment on. He's immediately brought to tears. This fight has a lot of similarities to Superman's fight with Doomsday, but it's also very different in ways that I think are telling of the differences between manga and comic books in general. Both fights feature the debut of the villain the hero fights, but in the death of Superman, Doomsday is nothing more than a monster who was only created to kill Superman. This comic isn't meant to wrap up an arc for Superman, it's just something DC decided to do, but man did it have an impact. The Death of Superman is one of the highest selling comics of all time. On the other hand, All For One was a character we had known about as the figure in the shadows puppeting the League of Villains for quite some time. We also know that this is the man that All Might wants to stop more than any other villain in the world. The fight is designed to wrap up All Might's subplot. By defeating One For All Might has achieved his goal before being forced to retire. Of course, the citizens of the Hiroaka universe were totally devastated to lose their Pillar of Peace, and crime saw a resurgence not dissimilar to the aftermath of the death of Superman, but it wasn't all familiar either. There wasn't a nonsensical return of the prodigal son, and there wasn't multiple heroes gunning for the #1 spot. Now, the similarities of the two situations are easy to understand, but the reasons behind the differences are a little bit more complex. Why hasn't All Might gotten a sudden resurgence of power? Well, besides the obvious reason of it being an absolutely terrible idea that totally betrays the reader's trust, the bigger reason is that All Might has no reason to return. While Superman and All Might are made to be parallel figures to the inhabitants of their respective universes, they're not parallel figures from the perspective of the audience of their respective stories. Superman is like the protagonist of DC Comics, while Midoriya is the protagonist of My Hero Academia. What the death of Superman offers DC narratively, and what the death of All Might offers Hiroaka narratively are two very different results. For our protagonist Midoriya, All Might's retirement is a call to arms. It's his turn as All Might's successor to become the new Pillar of Peace, which is what the entire story of My Hero Academia is largely about. However, in the DC universe, Superman's death would narratively be more akin to Naruto dying in his own series. And guess what happened when Naruto did die? Well, it was revealed that he actually managed to survive a seemingly fatal encounter. Sound familiar? That all explains why All Might hasn't made his comeback. But why wasn't there more contest for the #1 hero seat? The simplest reason that there wasn't a power vacuum after All Might's retirement is that the heroes are already ranked. We know for a fact that Endeavor is the next strongest hero, so there's no cause for debate. The other reasons are more cultural. In the DC universe, superheroism is not a career option like it is in Hiroaka. There's not much incentive to be a hero. As such, super powerful individuals can stay pretty secretive about their powers and decide to just not be superheroes. In the My Hero Academia universe, as far as we've seen in the main storyline, there's no particularly powerful people who aren't either superheroes or supervillains. Therefore, everyone strong enough to fill the void left by All Might is already in the public eye. There is no struggle to be had if the strengths of each contestant are all plain to see. But in DC, the death of Superman inspires characters who weren't in the superhero scene to step forward, resulting in new near-Superman-level heroes coming out of the woodwork, which isn't as likely to happen given the circumstances of the Hiroaka universe. I speculate that there's another reason for this difference, though. Since heroism as a profession is regulated and funded by the government, it adds an element of bureaucracy to the job. In comic books, many heroes are primarily freelance, so most of them don't feel that they have to answer to any superiors. But in Hiroaka, heroes are employed. We don't see much of the corporate side of the hero profession, but it makes sense to me that the people in charge would want to smooth over All Might's retirement as much as possible. They don't want heroes infighting for the position he held, so they make the transfer very straightforward. All Might isn't the greatest hero anymore, so now it's Endeavor. It's simple and uncomplicated, and it suggests to the public, and hopefully specifically the growing count of villains, that the superhero community won't stagger even at the loss of its greatest idol yet. Did this plan to subvert panic actually work? Well, that's a question for another video, but I do think that's a good reason for the universe not to have seen the same power struggle that we did after the death of Superman comic. If you ask me, I'd say that in light of these explanations, the disparity between the aftermath of the death of Superman and that of All Might's retirement is pretty reasonable. Sure, the two both represent the icons of peace for their respective worlds, but because their worlds are different, and the narrative that the stories are going for are different, the result of the same event plays out different. This, I think, is indicative of the difference between manga and comics. Because a manga is a single story written by a single author, every issue is allowed to contribute to an overarching story in a major way. Contrarily, in comic books, new stories are being written by new authors all the time. The Death of Superman comic and the aftermath of it are just an example of one of many Superman stories. It's like a quantity versus quality issue. Because comics are continuously being written by revolving authors, you'll never run out of stories to read. However, manga are allowed to be tighter narratively and concretely tell a complete story at their desired pace. That's the difference of manga versus comic books, and the difference between All Might and Superman. If you liked this video, feel free to subscribe, and keep an eye out for next week's video on No Game No Life. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, go ahead and post plus ultra in the comments. And if this video intrigued you about Superman, I'd highly recommend checking out the American Alien series by Max Landis. He's probably one of Kato's favorite authors.